Is this the best and worst hockey helmet of all time? It was the most iconic hockey helmet worn by the most iconic hockey player. The most historic piece of equipment in the history of the sport. At one point worn by most of the National Hockey League's biggest stars.
I'm gonna blow your mind. Gretzky, Lemieux, Yager, Forsberg.
It was very popular because it was almost like not wearing a helmet.
Alfredson, Rossi, McSorley.
I've seen Matt Sundin and the JOFA bucket on.
Solani.
Even today,
Can you sign it for me?
its legend continues to endure. Even though the model famously worn by Wayne Gretzky his entire career
JOFA and I grew up together.
didn't offer even the slightest bit of actual head protection.
We discouraged the players to actually use the helmet.
He went hard into the board.
It wasn't approved. They didn't pass the standards set by CSA.
It was basically like little shell, almost nothing.
Next to not wearing a helmet.
Let's put the JOFA helmet, hockey's worst,
Michel Goulet suffered a bad concussion.
best helmet, into focus. It was May 2014, the end of Game 7 of the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
The Los Angeles Kings, and once again, they will advance to the Western Conference Final.
It was also the end of an era.
On Timo Solani's final night in the National Hockey League. The final send-off for Timo.
But we're not talking about a legendary Hall of Fame NHL career.
All right, where do we begin? A JOFA helmet was the ultimate hockey gear you could possibly have. You know, like, let's get out there, guys.
If you want to understand the phenomenon that is the JOFA helmet, you'll first need to understand the company's history. About a 4-hour drive from the capital Stockholm, JOFA famously began with a manufacturing plant in Malung, Sweden. For years, the region has been the home of two of Sweden's most historic hockey clubs, Leksand and Hedemora. Hockey has always been a huge part of the local culture, so it's no surprise that the first product JOFA made was
3:42 to go, third period. Kings have had to
military gear.
Back in the day when it was started, it was manufacturing, material like tents and boots and so on for the military. But it was founded mainly to do footwear and so on.
That's right. JOFA started out manufacturing equipment for the Swedish military. But its primary focus was really anything having to do with molded plastics.
When I worked in a sports store when I was younger, they were the biggest supplier of shin pads in Sweden, I would say. Everything that was like plastic and protection they were able to do.
JOFA was so prolific with molded plastics that they eventually made, you guessed it, boats? Yes, JOFA used to make boats.
Yeah, they were quite popular. We made around 5,000 to 6,000 small boats here and some motor boats.
But what JOFA is really famous for, we're going to get to it now.
I think their first helmet was actually not a hockey helmet, but an equestrian helmet.
Oh boy. JOFA's hockey helmets didn't hit the market until the early 1960s, when the Swedish Hockey Federation mandated players wearing helmets, making Sweden the first country to require hockey players wear head protection.
It was one death in ice hockey every year in Sweden. And after 62, no one died from hitting the head after that. In North America at that time, they played without anything. They were hard guys.
And it was only a matter of time before one of the greatest players of his era discovered the JOFA helmet and propelled it to a whole other level. We are, of course, talking about this guy, Nils Nilsson. Nilsson went by the nickname Dubbel Nisse and actually would go on to work for JOFA. The Swedish hockey star propelled his country to the 1962 IIHF World Championship in Colorado Springs, and he did so sporting JOFA's Dubbel Nisse helmet and Dubbel Nisse stick, branded hockey gear that bore his namesake. More than 2 decades before Nike and Michael Jordan changed sports apparel forever with Air Jordans, JOFA was well ahead of the game.
Sure, Mark.
But we don't remember the boats or the tents or the shin pads or even the double nisse helmet. We remember this classic piece of headgear, JOFA Model 235. And the aura and beauty of the bucket endures long after Wayne Gretzky retired. But it didn't start with number 99.
It dates back to the 1972 Summit Series.
The Canada-Soviet Series.
The game is underway.
Several of the Soviet Union players wore that JOFA 235 helmet. Harlamov, Yakushev. I think that's the first time that helmet got exposure in Canada. If you look at the picture of Paul Henderson scoring that goal, which gave the victory to Team Canada, there's two Russian players, and they're both wearing the JOFA 235 helmet.
When I grew up, just about everybody in Europe, all these big tournaments, just was wearing JOFA. We had to have a helmet. It was already compulsory, but those were like homemade, made in Czechoslovakia. And nobody likes them, so we were kind of watching the big teams, and it looked like almost everybody had a JOFA.
To this day, it remains the helmet of record for JOFA, and we all know why.
Gretzky drives it, scores!
A quick editorial note here. We wanted this part about Gretzky and the Edmonton Oilers dynasty of the 1980s to be accompanied by the Richie Valens 1958 classic La Bamba. This song is currently played after every Oilers home win and was a favorite of the team's late dressing room attendant Joey Moss, who used to sing it during those cup runs. But we couldn't get the rights, so here's a cheap knockoff. When Gretzky and the Edmonton Oilers became one of the NHL's all-time great dynasties in the 1980s, JOFA was on full display.
JOFA started to get major penetration not only in Canada but in the US when we signed an endorsement deal with Gretzky.
Gretzky had already been wearing the helmet for some time before the folks over at JOFA even got wind of it.
Games from North America, we never saw anything like that. So I didn't know until late that Gretzky was wearing this helmet.
And it wasn't just Gretzky. Teammates Jari Kurri, Esa Tikkanen, Marty McSorley, and Charlie Huddy all sported the same JOFA Model 235.
Our slogan back then was JOFA Titan, the tools of greatness, with, of course, Wayne being the major player.
When the greatest comes down on the ice without JOFA, even the greatest would be at a loss. JOFA, light, flexible, and strongly built for the Gretzkys and all the winners.
It was comfortable for him. It was light and comfortable.
Well, it's very popular because it was almost like not wearing a helmet. Of course, that was coming out of the era where helmets were just starting to be worn.
Everything was on the up and up for JOFA and the Model 235 helmet. But here's a fun fact. In the 1970s and 80s, JOFA was actually owned by Volvo, a leader in automotive safety. And Volvo wanted JOFA to share that reputation for safety.
Volvo bought us in 73. They wanted us to have JOFA product on the elite league in Sweden and other elite leagues as well. To be the best with protective equipment.
So JOFA was flying high, manufacturing cutting-edge protective gear used across the world. Their parent company Volvo even occasionally gifted a car to some of the players who wore their equipment. But there was a problem. JOFA's equipment may have provided great protection.
It's the best.
But the 235 helmet, the product most closely associated with the company, well...
There was no protective value to it whatsoever. They weren't protective at all. The JOFA was just like a plastic shell, like a pizza box almost.
The standard at that time was to get protection in the front, in the top, in the back, not the side. Ice hockey helmet should not have a weight more than 325 grams. So it was very hard to meet that.
A little context here. That 325-gram limit is roughly the weight of a large apple or medium-sized potato. So it was pretty lightweight, which was why players liked it.
Wayne really never had to worry about any major punishment because he always had someone to protect him on the ice. It was just to protect him so he wouldn't get any cuts and bruises on his head.
Mark Messier, Gretzky's lead partner in crime for all those Oilers Cup runs, also came into the league sporting the JOFA helmet. But unlike his Oiler teammates, the JOFA helmet didn't quite take for Messier. Following a fight with Willie Plett, Messier sustained a cut to the head that required 8 stitches. He immediately ditched the JOFA helmet after getting stitched up.
That helmet didn't protect anything. Nothing. There was nothing there. I was like, 20 years old, still playing in my home team, Bratislava here. And my brother fired a slap shot on the power play, and the defenseman at the right moment tripped me. I went down, but I got hit in my ear. It was like a grenade. I got 28 stitches on my ear. And it was because it didn't protect anything. The 80s, I got that helmet, I noticed there was something written. I said, this helmet is not intending for the game of ice hockey. They put the warning in there, but like 20 years later.
Even though the helmet provided no head protection, several NHL players remained loyal to the 235. Of course, this was in a more prehistoric era of the NHL when it came to protection.
He went hard into the board, and I got trouble speaking to this point.
NHL players weren't required to wear helmets until 1979, and several veterans who were grandfathered into the rule kept on playing without one.
We were at a meeting with the players negotiating the CBA, and Marty McSorley, I'll never forget, he said, if you make me wear a helmet any heavier than this JOFA helmet, I won't be able to play in the NHL. It was a really determined point that players stuck really hard on that. They really wanted to keep that helmet, which we felt had no value.
We're trying to work on a number of issues, and it's not, simple black and white and yes and no.
The lack of protection provided by the 235 may have been a problem for players, but it was an even bigger problem for its manufacturer. JOFA had a helmet worn by many of the game's biggest stars, including the biggest to ever play, providing the kind of on-ice promotion most brands could only dream of. But because the model couldn't get approval from the Hockey Equipment Certification Council or the Canadian Standards Association, JOFA couldn't sell it. As you can probably imagine, this posed a pretty big challenge for the company. Saddled with an iconic product they couldn't sell, JOFA got to work on a newer, safer model that provided all the JOFA style while also, actually protecting your head. And they partnered with another NHL superstar to make that happen.
Hat-trick for Mario Lemieux.
When we were in the midst of designing the new helmet, Mario was actually part of the process, every step of the way to get his approval, to make sure that he was going to wear the helmet. And it worked.
He put his stamp here. Approved Mario Lemieux.
Say hello to the JOFA 366. Or as we like to call it, the Mario model. Just want to point out that's a JOFA 390 modified to look like a 366. You see, when it comes to designing these products, modifications are a constant. In fact, the 366 was heavily modified after JOFA got back plenty of player feedback.
We had to cut off the earpieces because the players didn't like it. The foam made the helmet too far from the player's head, so we had to put a thinner foam inside.
So while this new helmet model looked sleek, stylish, and was protective, by the time these players were done with it,
wouldn't have passed the CSA standard or the HEC standard for impact, but still offered decent amount of protection, much more than the JOFA Gretzky 235 helmet.
But even with younger stars like Mario Lemieux, Jaromir Jagr, Teemu Selanne, Peter Forsberg, and Phil Housley strapping on the new JOFA, some players, including Gretzky, refused to part with the 235. So JOFA went on the offensive to try to make the switch from the Wayne model to the Mario model.
We even added bonuses to their endorsement deals to say, listen, please wear this helmet.
That's right. JOFA actually approached NHL players, including Wayne Gretzky, and tried to convince them not to wear the helmet they helped make so popular.
we discouraged anyone to purchase the helmet. And again, we put stickers in the helmet, not approved for ice hockey, not CSA or HEC approved. We were competing with CCM and Bauer, who were selling helmets that were HEC and CSA approved. So we struggled with that.
Even with Gretzky refusing to part with the 235, the same helmet he would wear his entire NHL career, JOFA's share of the hockey market was exploding in the mid-1990s. And it actually had nothing to do with helmets.
JOFA brand was the #1 shoulder pad in the NHL with about 30% usage. The only problem that JOFA had back then is that we weren't able to market it because all the equipment was under the uniforms. Finally, we put together a license agreement with the National Hockey League. We had a slogan. We were the official protective equipment of the National Hockey League. We could finally tell our story. It was huge for JOFA.
It was while JOFA was dominating the industry that the company's resident guru, Leif Skottheim, designed his newest helmet, the 690. With a newer, sleeker design, this helmet was going to launch JOFA into the next millennium. The company appeared to be on the cusp of a new golden age in the hockey world, but it was actually the beginning of the end. At the time, JOFA was owned by The Hockey Company, a collection of top hockey brands. And with all these brands competing under a single corporate banner, Leif Skottheim's newest helmet got snubbed.
I think it was a lot of mistakes done at that time.
When Reebok acquired The Hockey Company in 2004 in a deal valued at around $329 million, JOFA got completely squeezed out.
That's when the JOFA brand disappeared. If you look at the brand where it came from, which is a great hockey market and developed such amazing hockey players, it's very sad.
With JOFA phased out by Reebok, their iconic helmet disappeared from the National Hockey League, where over 90% of players now wear a streamlined model manufactured by either CCM, Bauer, or Warrior. But there was a lone holdout who continued to carry the JOFA torch for years. When he retired in 2014, that was it for JOFA.
What a remarkable career he has had.
Well, when he retired, it was kind of like the end of my end of my childhood. It's like my hero growing up, and I aspire to be like him.
It's going to be tough to wake up tomorrow morning and realize it's all over.
And despite the Hall of Fame resume, Selanne is still closely associated with his lid.
Can you sign my JOFA there? Where's my helmet? It's right here. Oh, look at this. Can you sign it for me? I brought a marker. Oh, good. You're the man.
And plenty of Selanne's old NHL colleagues are also remembered fondly for their time wearing JOFA lids. That fact wasn't lost on Phil Housley during his Hockey Hall of Fame induction.
I know I've taken a lot of grief over the years for this helmet, but I thought I'd bring it out one more time. I'd like to thank JOFA. You're going into the Hall of Fame.
Even in the Monday Night League that I played in, there were still guys actually wearing the helmet.
This guy rocking a JOFA helmet? What are your thoughts on the new JOFA? Look, this thing's authentic. Authentic from Sweden.
As the throwback trend has taken over sports, several collectors have helped preserve the helmet's legacy.
There's a Kings one.
Collectors like Kyle.
JOFA reminds me of a wonderful time in my life as a child, playing hockey for like 5 years or something of my life. I just think it's great. I don't know.
An industrial designer from Chicago, an amateur JOFA historian who has spent years collecting.
Jaromir Jagr signed. This is Selanne's rookie helmet.
Refurbishing and modifying old JOFA helmets.
I would like to design a helmet. As far as I know, not a single other person has ever put an Oakley visor on a Gretzky helmet other than Jaromir Jagr. Like, I can't even believe it. It's like, you're gonna do that. Dude, absolutely badass. By the way, I'd love to design a fake mullet to just kind of, it just snaps in the back, maybe on the helmet clips.
The old JOFA factory in Malung now largely serves as a warehouse for CCM, although it does continue to manufacture balls for bandy, a unique sport popular in Europe that is kind of a mix between ice hockey and soccer. Leif is still in that JOFA warehouse working as a consultant, with his principles still being used today. And that workshop he used all the way back in 1969, today it looks more like a JOFA museum.
All my test equipment and things still here. Mario Lumiere had this make. I made him a prototype. They have a little connection to the company still, so they...
Not to worry, the brand hasn't completely vanished, as CCM offers apparel on their website that bears the classic JOFA logo. But there recently was an interesting development over at CCM that could potentially help resuscitate the old brand.
So since 1st of January, we have a Canadian-Swedish ownership today.
You hear that? Swedish ownership. So taking that into consideration, what are the odds that the classic JOFA helmet somehow gets back on the market?
Yeah, you never know. You should never say no. I don't think they will come in and tell me that you need to bring JOFA back now. But of course, you shouldn't forget about the heritage you're having. For 2026, the brand will be a little bit more visible again, I would say.
That's right, JOFA lovers. CCM has some big plans for the old JOFA bucket in 2026 to mark the 100th anniversary of the company that made everything from tents to boats to soccer shin pads, but is mostly remembered for a very special piece of protective equipment that didn't actually offer any sort of protection.